Have you ever met someone who just can't turn their brain off? You ask them a simple question and they're still analyzing their answer 3 hours later. A friend sends a one-word reply and suddenly they're retracing every conversation from the past 2 weeks, trying to figure out what they did wrong. They lie awake at 2 a.m. not because anything bad happened, but because their minds had decided that right now is the perfect time to replay every embarrassing thing they've ever said since 2009. And people around them say things like, just stop overthinking it, as if that were an option, as if the person doing it hadn't already thought of that. But here's the question nobody's asking. What if the overthinking isn't the problem? What if it's actually the solution to something much older? Because psychology has identified something really important here that most people completely miss. There is not one type of person who overthinks. There are two. And the difference between them changes everything.
The first type thinks deeply because they're genuinely working something through. They sit with complexity, weigh outcomes, consider angles. Psychologists call this reflective rumination, and in measured doses, it's linked to better decision-making, higher emotional intelligence, and creative problem-solving.
The second type isn't thinking to find answers. They're thinking to feel safe. And from the outside, those two people look exactly the same. For the second type, it usually starts early, an environment where things were unpredictable, a childhood where bad things sometimes happened without warning, and the only defense available was to think harder, anticipate more, stay one step ahead of whatever was coming. The mind learned that vigilance was protection, that if you could just think through every possible outcome, you could prevent being blindsided again. So the overthinking didn't come from nowhere. It was hired for a job, and it did that job so well that it never got told it could stop. And here's what the research says happens next. A study from UC Santa Barbara found that people who engage in chronic repetitive thinking show excessive overactivity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making over time. The very act of overthinking, meant to produce better decisions, actually interferes with the brain's capacity to make them clearly. You are quite literally thinking yourself into worse judgment. Psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema of Yale University, who spent decades studying rumination, found something equally uncomfortable. Overthinking doesn't just fail to solve problems, it actively amplifies emotional distress, increases the likelihood of depression, and narrows the range of solutions a person can see. The more you turn a problem over in your mind, the smaller the world of possible answers becomes. And you see this play out. The person who researches a decision so thoroughly that by the time they've finished, they can no longer tell what they actually want. The person who writes a text, deletes it, rewrites it, deletes it again, and sends nothing because no version felt safe enough. That's not carefulness. That's a nervous system that was never told the war was over.
Here's something else that's fascinating. Chronic overthinkers are often the most capable people in the room. High-functioning, detail-oriented, rarely caught off guard, which means the people around them almost never think to ask if they're okay because they always seem so on top of everything. The cost is invisible, and invisible costs have a way of accumulating quietly until the interest becomes impossible to ignore. Then there's what this does to the body. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, cannot distinguish between a real danger and a thought about a danger. Every time your mind rehearses a catastrophic scenario, your body responds as if it's actually happening. Cortisol spikes, heart rate elevates, muscles brace. Research consistently links chronic psychological stress to similar cardiovascular damage as recurring physical stressors. Your body is preparing for an emergency that exists only in your head every single day. Now, here's the thing that matters most. If you recognize yourself in any of this, the goal is not to stop thinking deeply. Depth of thought is not the enemy. The goal is to notice the difference between thinking that moves you forward and thinking that just keeps you spinning in place. Because the moment you can interrupt the loop and ask yourself, am I solving something right now, or am I just trying to feel safe? Something shifts. Psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan found that even a small act of self-distancing, stepping back and observing your own thoughts rather than drowning in them, significantly reduces emotional intensity and breaks the rumination cycle almost immediately. You were not born with a broken brain. You were born with a brain that adapted brilliantly to something it once needed to survive. The problem is that it never updated the threat assessment. It's still scanning for dangers from an environment that no longer exists. The person who can't stop overthinking isn't weak or neurotic or permanently wired wrong. Sometimes they're the most perceptive person in the room, and they've been using that perception as armor for so long they've forgotten it was ever supposed to be a gift.